Meet Pastor Odion Olajide, the beloved leader of the Way of Truth Assembly, known for his powerful sermons and miraculous healings. Behind the pulpit, however, lies a dark secret. Driven by envy of wealthier pastors, Odion makes a sinister pact with a malevolent spirit named Master Lulu, trading the lives of his congregation for supernatural powers and success. At first, the results are extraordinary. Crowds flood his church, offerings pour in, and his fame skyrockets. But as the spirit's demands escalate, Odion spirals into guilt and paranoia. When Grace, his most devoted follower, becomes the next target, the facade begins to crumble. The city of Tara, nestled along the Nigerian coastline, was a place of stark contrasts. Gleaming skyscrapers stood tall over sprawling markets, and luxurious estates coexisted with crowded slums. Amid this bustling city was Pastor Odion Olajide, known simply as Pastor O. He was a man of conviction, or at least he had been. Pastor O was in his late 30s, with a commanding presence that filled any room he entered. His smooth baritone voice, often laced with passion, had the power to move crowds. He had started his ministry, the Way of Truth Assembly, 10 years ago in the heart of Tara's lower-income district. For years, he preached to a small but devoted congregation, urging them to trust in God's provision and remain steadfast in their faith. But the reality of his circumstances gnawed at him. The church was no more than a modest hall with wooden benches, a small pulpit, and a leaking roof. Offerings barely covered the rent, and his growing family often went without. His wife, Adejua, a supportive woman with a heart of gold, managed to hold things together with her sewing business, but her quiet strength only deepened Oo's shame. It didn't help that his contemporaries were thriving. Pastors like Uche Adekunle, who ran the sprawling House of Glory Cathedral, were not only spiritual leaders but also wealthy celebrities. Pastor Uche drove a sleek black Range Rover, lived in a mansion in Banana Island, and had millions of followers on social media. Oo couldn't help but feel overshadowed every time he saw Pastor Uche on billboards or television, delivering sermons in his perfectly tailored suits. One fateful day, Pastor Oo attended a pastors' conference in Tara's business district. The grand hall was packed with clergy from all over the state. Pastor Uche was the keynote speaker, and his address was nothing short of mesmerizing. "Brothers and sisters in Christ," Uche began, his voice booming through the microphone, "the Lord desires for us to prosper, not just spiritually but financially. A poor pastor is a poor testimony to the glory of God." The crowd erupted into applause, but Oo sat in silence, a storm of emotions brewing inside him. After the session, he mustered the courage to approach Uche. "Pastor Uche," Oo said, extending his hand, "your message truly resonated with me. I've been struggling to grow my ministry and I was wondering if you might have any advice." Uche smiled, his teeth gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Pastor Oo, success requires sacrifice," he said cryptically. "Let me introduce you to someone who can help open your eyes." The name he gave Oo was Baba Iu, a spiritualist who, according to Uche, had a way of unlocking doors that faith alone could not. Oo wrestled with the idea for weeks. He had always believed in hard work and prayer, but the frustration of seeing no tangible results made him question everything. Was it truly God's plan for him to struggle indefinitely? Finally, desperation outweighed his doubts, and he decided to visit Baba Iu. The journey to Baba Iu's home took Oo deep into the outskirts of Tara, far from the bustling city center. The compound was surrounded by dense vegetation, and an eerie silence hung in the air. The gate creaked as Oo pushed it open, revealing a modest bungalow adorned with carvings of strange symbols. Baba Iu, a wiry man with piercing eyes, greeted him with a knowing smile. "Welcome, Pastor O. I've been expecting you." Oo felt a chill run down his spine. "How did you know I was coming?" Baba Iu chuckled. "The spirits whispered it to me. Come, let us talk." They sat in a dimly lit room filled with the scent of burning herbs. Baba Iu spoke in a measured tone, explaining the spiritual hierarchy that governed wealth and power. "There is a spirit," he said, "called Master Lulu. He grants power and prosperity to those who are willing to make sacrifices. He has elevated many men of God to greatness, but his gifts come with responsibilities. What kind of responsibilities? O asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You must offer something in return, something of value. Could be prayers, rituals, or even lives. The greater the sacrifice, the greater the blessing. O recoiled. Lives. You mean, human lives. Baba Ayu waved his hand dismissively. Do not be alarmed. It is not as gruesome as it sounds. Master Lulu requires only the essence of certain individuals, those with pure spirits. You will be guided when the time comes. Oo's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to walk away, to call this entire meeting a mistake. But then he thought of his leaking church roof, his struggling family, and the success of men like Uche. The lure of wealth and influence was too strong to resist. What do I need to do? He asked finally. Baba Ayu smiled. The first step is acceptance. Open your heart to Master Lulu, and he will reveal the path to you. The days that followed were a whirlwind of strange rituals and whispered prayers. Oo felt a newfound energy coursing through him, and soon, his ministry began to change. Miracles started happening during his services. Healings, prophecies, and deliverances that left his congregation in awe. Word spread quickly, and within months, the Way of Truth Assembly became one of the fastest-growing churches in Tara. Offerings poured in, and Oo was finally able to renovate the church, buy a new car, and move his family into a comfortable home. For the first time in years he felt like a success. But beneath the surface, he couldn't ignore the voice of doubt that lingered in his mind. One night, as he prepared for bed, Master Lulu appeared to him in a dream. The spirit took the form of a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. You have tasted my blessings, it said. Now it is time to honor our agreement. A pure soul must be offered. O woke up in a cold sweat, his chest heaving. The reality of what he had done was sinking in, but there was no turning back now. He had made his choice, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. The once vibrant atmosphere of the Way of Truth Assembly had begun to change. Though the congregation was larger than ever, whispers of unease spread among the members. The miraculous healings and prophecies that had brought people to the church were now clouded by a series of strange occurrences. Long-standing members had suddenly fallen ill, vanished, or turned up dead under mysterious circumstances. Still, the allure of Pastor O's miracles kept the pews full every Sunday. For Pastor Odion Olajide, the weight of his secret grew heavier with each passing day. The success he had so desperately craved now felt like a curse. His nights were plagued with nightmares of Master Lulu, the dark spirit whose pact had made it all possible. In his dreams, the spirit appeared more menacing with each visit, demanding further sacrifices to sustain the church's success. One night, the spirit's voice came to him in his sleep. The time has come for another offering, Odion. A pure soul must be given. Pastor Oo bolted upright in bed, drenched in sweat. Adejua, his wife, stirred beside him. Odion, what is it? Another bad dream, she asked, her voice groggy with sleep. It's nothing, he muttered, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. But it wasn't nothing. He knew exactly what Master Lulu meant, and it filled him with dread. The next day, as Pastor Oo stood at the pulpit, his eyes scanned the congregation. They landed on Grace Olorunfemi, a young woman in her mid-20s who had been a member of the church since its inception. Grace was known for her unwavering faith and cheerful demeanor. She had been instrumental in recruiting new members, and often led the church's choir with her angelic voice. Master Lulu's voice echoed in Oo's mind. She is the one. Pastor Oo clenched the edges of the pulpit, his knuckles white. The thought of sacrificing Grace made his stomach churn, but he knew the consequences of disobedience were far worse. He had seen what happened to others who tried to break their pacts: poverty, disgrace, and even death. After the service, he approached Grace with a forced smile. "Grace, my daughter, how are you?" "I'm fine, Pastor," she said, beaming. The Lord has been so good to me. I feel so blessed to be part of this church. Oo's heart ached at her words, but he steeled himself. That's wonderful to hear. Listen, I feel led to pray for you privately. Could you come by the church office tomorrow? Grace agreed without hesitation, completely unaware of the dark intentions lurking behind her pastor's kind demeanor. The next evening, Grace arrived at the church office. She wore a simple white dress and carried her Bible, as she always did. Pastor Oo greeted her warmly and led her into his office, locking the door behind them. As they sat, he began to pray, his voice trembling. Heavenly Father, we come before you today to seek your guidance and protection. But even as he spoke the words, his mind was elsewhere. The room felt stifling, and the air seemed heavy with an unseen presence. Master Lulu was there waiting. Grace closed her eyes, bowing her head in reverence, unaware of the ritual Pastor Oo was about to perform. He hesitated, his conscience screaming at him to stop. But the image of Master Lulu's glowing red eyes flashed in his mind, accompanied by a voice that growled, "Do it or lose everything." Tears streamed down Oo's face as he continued the ritual. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small vial filled with a dark liquid, a concoction Baba Iu had given him for sacrifices. He sprinkled it into a bowl of water and recited the incantation Baba had taught him. Grace suddenly shuddered, her body stiffening as if caught in an invisible grip. Her eyes flew open wide with terror. "Pastor, what's happening?" Oo couldn't meet her gaze. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive me for what I must do." Grace's screams echoed through the room, but they were drowned out by the deafening roar of Master Lulu's laughter. The spirit's shadowy form materialized, swirling around Grace as she collapsed to the floor, unconscious. When the ritual was complete, the room fell silent. Grace lay motionless, her once vibrant energy now a faint flicker. Master Lulu's voice filled the room. "Well done, Odeon. Your loyalty is noted. For now, your success will continue." Over the next few weeks, Grace's health deteriorated rapidly. The once lively young woman grew pale and frail, her voice barely a whisper. Members of the church began to question what was happening. Some whispered that Pastor Oo's prayers weren't as powerful as they had believed. Others began to suspect that something darker was at play. Adejua noticed the change in her husband too. "Odeon, you've become distant," she said one evening. "You barely sleep, and when you do, you wake up screaming. What's going on?" "I'm just tired," he lied. But Adejua wasn't convinced. She decided to investigate on her own. Meanwhile, Grace's family confronted Pastor O. "Pastor, we trusted you," her father said, tears streaming down his face. "What happened to my daughter?" "She was fine until she came to you." Pastor Oo tried to placate them, offering vague assurances that God was still in control. But his words rang hollow. The guilt of what he had done consumed him, and he began to wonder if the price of his success was too high. One Sunday, as Pastor Oo stood before his congregation, ready to deliver his sermon, Grace's father stormed into the church, interrupting the service. "This man is no pastor," he shouted, pointing at Oo. "He's a fraud, a liar, and worse. My daughter is dying because of him." The congregation erupted into chaos. People began shouting, demanding answers. Some defended Oo, while others joined Grace's father in accusing him of foul play. In the midst of the commotion, Adejua stood up. "Enough," she said, her voice firm. "Odeon, tell them the truth. Tell them what you've been hiding." Pastor O froze, the weight of his secrets pressing down on him. The room fell silent as everyone waited for his response. Tears streamed down his face as he finally spoke. "I have sinned," he confessed, his voice trembling. "I allowed greed and ambition to lead me astray. I made a pact with darkness, and now I am paying the price." Gasps filled the room as the truth sank in. Some people wept, while others shouted in anger. But Oo knew that his confession was only the beginning of his penance. As the congregation dispersed, many vowed never to return. Grace's family took her away, hoping to find help elsewhere. And Pastor Oo, stripped of his power and reputation, was left alone to face the consequences of his choices.